Hi, I'm Alex Bates, talking today about the up-and-coming Winter League final on the Fenland drains and decoy, more in particular about the drains and how they're fishing and what tactics you need to be using, sections, what sort of weights, things like that. Having grown up in March and worked in the local tackle shop there for many years, and now moving on to having my own tackle shop, Tackle&Bates, as in my surname Bates. Yes, I can spell Bates. We're not just, being on a commercial fishery, we're not just stocking your general run-of-the-mill barbless hooks, pellets, things like that. Because I am an angler that fishes the drains week in, week out, it's a shop for, you know, we have the hot rods anglers, the Mark 1 anglers, all the local Fenland drain teams all come and use me for a bit of bait and a bit of knowledge as well, hopefully. So we stock, you know, specialised wagglers for maybe Benwick, you know, pole floats for the Old Nene, ground bait mixes, certain hook patterns, things like that. So everything you'll need to find regarding the drains we've got in the tackle shop. So A section for the Winter League final is on March, which is known as Wigston's Bridge, or BMX track, some people like to call it. Peg 1 will be near the Coal Yard Bridge. I know that Kai Jerome has been working hard to cut some extra pegs, because last year there was that section, there was I think 6 pegs behind the swimming pool in with that. So this year all of A section is at Wigston's or BMX track, which is a massive bonus. You haven't got a big gap there. It's your typical depths. Old Nene depths, it's probably about 4 foot down the middle, shallows up, there's a few boats, there's one famous one known as Hemp Boat, I don't know why. Then as you go to, you've got Wigston's Bridge, and then you've got Wigston's on the grass, which are the 6 pegs above the bridge. They can be very good. The first couple from the bridge, they're reasonable, but the better pegs are further down. It's a bit awkward to get in. There's a little culvert there, it's quite muddy and it's steep banks, but it's worth getting down there for. There's some good fishing there. So that's A section 1 to 33 or 34. B section starts near the swimming pool, which has probably been the form area of the Old Nene this year. Lots of big weights, not just in 1 or 2 pegs, but for sort of 7 or 8 pegs they've been catching over the 20 pound and even 30 pound in some of the matches. Then that runs, I think that finishes probably near the windmill, somewhere just before the windmill for the anglers that know where that is, which is just through the allotments gate near the stile. So that'll be a pretty consistent section, I would have said. C section is from the windmill, so just into the allotments there, going to the bypass, and I think there's some pegs at the bypass as well. That's all consistent through there. I reckon 10 to 12 pound will probably be a decent weight through there. All depends on the weather. If it goes mild, you could need more than that. There could be a few rudd kicking about. You know, odd big skimmer in some pegs just before the bypass bridge there. There's some pegs with bigger gaps and more room where they tend to feed. So that's A, B and C. D section will be Benwick. So that's starting from the town. There'll be 6 or 7 pegs in the town, and then the first 6 or 7 match pegs. That'll be a very consistent section. I reckon 14 or 15 pound will probably win that section. And then the next section is obviously 8 pegs from there, so sort of just before the end of the lane, and then another 6 or 8 pegs at Little London. Probably not quite as much to win that. You're probably looking at just over double figures to win that section. There could be some big fish caught there, especially any end peg with a bit of room. You might catch a few tench, some big perch. And then going on to E section. E section is the split. Last year there was a full section on the 20 foot with chain bridge and footbridge being used. This year there's a few fish at chain bridge, but not even a quarter of what was there last year. I mean, last year the fishing was absolutely fantastic. You know, you could catch 30 pound from every peg, either fishing a shallow for rudd or a waggler for rudd, and then you could fish on the deck and catch 30 pound of nice little dumpy roach. So factory bank is 1.5. There's 17 or 16 pegs on there. You're probably looking for 14 or 15 pound again to do any good. Mainly be roach fishing there. Good areas. Sometimes you need to be the town end, and sometimes you need to be in the middle of the length, what's known as the crash barriers. You got some pegs with a bit more depth across, and you can catch some nice stampy roach there. And then moving on to where I've been today, that's the footbridge. So I think there'll be 5 or 6 pegs one side and 10 or 11 pegs the other side. To the right of the footbridge, the first 2 or 3 pegs are normally full of small roach, so it's a numbers game there. You know, looking for 300 to 400 fish to do any good there. And then the further you go away from the bridge, the roach tend to tail off, and there can be a few big fish caught there, some big tench, an odd bream maybe, but normally some tench. If it's warm, you're looking at possibly 8 or 10 tench in a match, and they're not small, they're 4 or 5 pound, these fish. So although you're probably not on them on the roach, you've got a chance of catching some big tench. Moving to the other side of the bridge, the first couple of pegs, the first peg's quite shallow where it comes from the bridge, and then the next 2 or 3 are really deep. If it's got a lot of flow on it like it's had on today, it's just one massive whirlpool, and you'd be very unlucky to draw that peg, and it is like that. In normal conditions, you're probably looking to catch 30 pound, if not 35 pound. Nice stampy roach, just fishing really aggressively, 4 plus 1 or 5 to hand or 5 plus 1, fishing sort of 2, 3, 4 gram rig straight down, getting some bait in your peg, and then the further you go down, then you might have to wait for bites, like to my left of where I've been today. You might wait an hour for the fish to come, but when they move, they're stampy fish, and it doesn't take long to put weight together. I mean, last year I waited 4 hours for a bite, and the last hour I had 13.5 pound in an hour. So when they turn up, you can really motor along. Shame they didn't turn up 3 hours before that. I might have had a chance of winning the match. But there may be a few, I mean, when the fish are not there, while you're waiting for them to turn up, normally if I draw those pegs, I'd probably put 5 or 6 balls in, just to test the water as such, see what's happening. If you are waiting for a bite, I'd keep looking to my right, looking for how far the fish are coming, because you'll see the anglers around you, the fish will slowly move down. When they get to the peg above you, that's when I'd proper put some kit in. I'd probably ball it sort of 5-10 minutes before you think the fish are going to arrive, get some bait in your peg, so when they do move through, you can hold quite a lot of them, and then you just got to get your head down and do some damage. I started using some bowline ground baits called Black Roach. I've used it quite a bit in Ireland and Tamar and places like where you need to fish positively, you need lots of bait in your peg, and it's a really sticky mix. It holds a lot of different particles, lots of hemp, which is always good on the drains. Basically the mix is, I use 3 kilos of that, just put that through a fine riddle, just take any large particles out. I use 1 kilo of the Frenzy Match Black Dark, which is a really good mix for any of the drains. It's sort of my base mix that I always work from. And then I add 1 kilo of Turbo Black. I mean, Turbo gets everything down, that'll sink like a brick. It holds the bait and it's perfect. One key thing about mixing your ground bait in all the drains, I think is a big thing, is mixing them the night before. You want inert mixes. Even if you're fishing on the Old Nene, factory bank, you need a mix that's going to go down and just stay there. When you start using active mixes, you start drawing the wrong size fish into your peg, or pushing your fish away from the bait further down your peg. So I always tend to mix the night before, and I use Sensus Arrow Mix. Normally the guard-ons, gross guard-ons, I think it just doesn't really matter as long as you're using an Arrow Mix, and it's going to deaden the mix right down. For the 20-foot venues like I've been on today, I'm probably looking to feed probably every 3 or 4 fish, just to keep the fish active and interested in the pinkies. Moving on to a basic approach on March would be to start on the bread, normally at top kit +3 or top kit +2, depending on whereabouts you pegged. I normally fish bread, but I do things a bit differently. I always take liquidized and punch crumb to my peg, and then I adjust it according to the flow on the day or where I've drawn. I mean, if the harder areas down by the allotments or bypass back towards town, I tend to use a 70-30 mix in liquidized to punch crumb, and then if I get there and it's got some pace, I'll use probably 70-30 in the favour of punch crumb. Gravel is a must, even if it's not flowing. You need to get the bread down and to break up probably about that far from the deck. If you start using nice wafy bread mixes, all you're going to catch is small fish. And like I was saying earlier, when you're in a fish race, you need to be catching the right stamp fish. As that's normally in the deeper water, I'll probably fish a range of rigs from 0.4, 0.6, 0.8. I either use the original Preston, I think the PT Series 6, a nice little red body float, a little, not diamond, but a nice little pear drop. And I've got some custom made ones with a cane bristle for the bread as well. And then I'll fish a line not too far over. Anglers that come to the Old Nene at March, they see they've got a tree opposite them or a boat or some sort of feature in the peg. You think, oh, I've got to fish tight to that. It's all about finding the right depth of water. On a Daiwa pole, it's probably 3 inches underneath where your number 2 joins your number 3, that magic top kit depth as everyone calls it. I look for that. It might be only a section or a section and a half past where I'm fishing my bread line, but it's key. That's where you need to be fishing because that's where the fish want to be. Normally I'll probably feed 500ml of hemp and I'll just cap it off with a big handful of squats, white squats in the Fens. We don't use red squats like other parts of the country, it's all white squats. And I'll just spread that on a nice little area in my peg just so I've got a base to fish from. I'll start on the bread. And the key is not to loose feed that line from the start because you're just going to take all the fish from down the middle to that line straight away. You need a good probably hour and a half on the bread line. You know when it's starting to go on you because you're having to top up more and more regularly. And that's when I start reaching for the catapult and start just loose feeding, probably 15 to 20 squats at a time. Before I go on it, I have a quick look on a hemp rig, see if there's any hemp fish there. Normally if you're going to catch on hemp, you'll lay your rig and it'll just carry on going, and that's how March is. It's not one of the venues where you can nick a couple of fish on the hemp and then come off it and then go back on it. It's either fish a chuck on it or you don't get a bite. It's as simple as that. When I start going across on the squat, I shall have a range of rigs from 410s even up to a half gram little bulk down rig for fishing double pinky or double squat on the hook. Just loose feed straight over your area and then just lower your rig in nice and steady like you're lowering a bloodworm rig in almost, and you'll pick them nice little chunky little 2-3 ounce fish, then reach for your light rigs and you'll start catching them on the drop. That's March really. You can start going from A section to B section, it's pretty much the same. When you start coming out of B section, which is known as the allotments, with the amount of pressure that the drain's been having with the Winter League final obviously coming up, it starts to get a little bit iffy. That's when you might want to set some little trap for some perch, just feed some soil, minced up worms in some soil, up and down your peg. Normally when the drain switches flow and backs up or stops stand still, that's when you need to start feeding those lines. So going on to the rigs for bedding, we use really positive rigs, 4 or 5 inch hook length with a little spread bulk, or some people fish really push them right down tight. Just lower them in like a bloodworm rig, normally 0.6 or 0.4 depending on flow. I mean Benwick is very similar, is the Old Nene, but just a different part of it. It'll back up to the left, then go to the right, then stand still. So you need to be in control of where your loose feed's ending up. That's key to keep catching. Fish again all round your bait. Sometimes you can drop down your peg, sometimes you can drop short. But don't stop feeding. That is the key to all these drains, is even if you're only feeding 3 or 4 squats or 3 or 4 pinkies all the time, you just need to have that bait dripping through the water to draw more and more fish in your peg. I wouldn't probably worry. I mean personally I don't fish a whip. I mean everyone associates the Fens with fishing whips and it's the whip haven and all this. The only time I will fish a whip is when I'm fishing shallow, bottom end only, and I'm trying to catch lots of rudd or fish shallow. In my eyes you will not beat short lining. One, you hit every bite. If you do miss a bite, you lower it in, you're fishing straight away. It's more efficient, you're in control of your match, where the fish are in your peg. With as a whip, you can search your peg, but it just isn't the same. It just isn't the same. I mean, we call them Skinner rigs, which locally I think the chap's name's Derek Skinner, which basically is a wire stem pole float. which you turn the metal bit down, slide the rubber so it acts like an eye in the end of the float, and then basically you're fishing it like a waggler, but it's a pole float. You look at it and you think, oh, that looks horrendous, you know, you're not going to catch nothing on that. But because it's the Fens, it's windy, you're open to the elements, you get horrible skim on these drains, and basically you flicking it out and you sink in your line and it fishes straight away. So if you are comfortable fishing the whip, I would suggest using that rig rather than a normal bottom end only, and having you keep mending your line and stuff like that. So that rig, we do use them to great effect in the Fens. I think a lot of parts of the country wouldn't. You just look at it and you go, what, he's a clam pit. So yeah, so that's Bennick. You want to fish a line again just past your main two lines, and I put hemp in there. The reason for hemp, it's a good base. You can catch, obviously you can loose feed over it and catch on hemp on the hook, or again, as the fish back off, they will naturally just progress across. One thing to mention on the drains, so one of the Mark 1 anglers told me once, fish against the fish and not against the anglers around you, which to me was one of the best advice I've had, because you can watch anglers that go over too early and they're pushing the fish across, and then until later on in the match they're pushing the fish out of their pegs. So in my eyes, fish against the fish and not against the anglers around you. Again, little waggler can work on there when they back right up the far shelf, but this year it's not really been working. Bennick's a lot shallower and silted up more than it ever has been, and the fish tend to be down that middle to 3/4 line most of the day now. There'll be lots of zander and pike and perch strikes. I mean, that doesn't really affect the fishing as such, but that's why I like to feed two areas in my peg, because if there is a predator or your bites are drying up on one line, just switch to the other line. Not only that, when you're fishing two lines in your peg, every time you rest the line and go on to the other, the fish are that little bit better stamp, and you constantly keep catching between the two the right stamp fish. Moving on to Factory Bank. So Factory Bank is, I think, a 16 or 17 peg section, and that is in with 16 or 17 pegs at the footbridge on the 20 foot, so the two halves of the section. Factory Bank, anglers that have never been there will probably look at it and eyes pop out of their head. It's very narrow, very steep banks. As a match length, it's pretty consistent all the way through. Lots of roach, there's lots of little waspy perch, which you can always catch them if there's no roach in your peg. Most of your depth is at your feet. What I would normally start is I start on a little line, probably finely chopped worms, a few maggots and a tiny bit of lean, just on a top kit straight in front of you. And that's what I'll start there, normally for a few perch, just while my main lines settle. Slightly down my peg, probably I would say about 8 o'clock, I will feed my main ground bait line, and that will consist of 4 or 5 balls of ground bait. Not too much bait on Factory Bank, they're not really one for that. And then straight in front of me, I will loose feed. Normally, if it's running and coloured, it will be pinkies. If it's standard Factory Bank, I should be loose feeding squats. Not quite a few, 30 or 40 squats at a time. And basically what you're doing is you're using your ground bait as your bottom as your peg, because if you go past your ground bait, you end up running the risk of the fish going past your bait and running them out of your peg. That's why you loose feed in front. They'll even have a few fish come and sit above them. On the real good days, the bigger fish will sit above your loose feed where they're looking for more and more food. But switch between right over where your loose feed is going and right over your ground bait, and then in between, sometimes you'll catch shorter of your bait. Rig wise, again, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8. I mean, if it is flowing, you'll perhaps need a gram. If it is fishing really well, you can fish nice little strong out rigs. Some people fish a little bulk and some styles underneath it and just hold it dead tight. The key on Factory Bank, in my eyes, I mean, other anglers have different opinions, but with Factory Bank, you need to be catching down the middle as long as possible, because as soon as you go over there, you run the risk of the fish going out of your peg. Now, I normally put, again, 250ml pot of hemp tight across. I've got the option of either putting a ground bait line over the top or loose feeding. Normally is the key. When you start, you sense the fish are going across, then I'll start loose feeding instead of squats down the middle. That'll be going tight over. You can fish a nice little, again, the rigs I was telling you about in March, a nice little bulk down rig, lowering it in, you can catch over your bait. But normally you want sort of a 412s rig and just lay it in and just proper squat fishing. And then the longer you leave that line, the more chance of a better last hour. When everyone else's lines are starting to tail off and the fish are backing away from them, you've got that full back line, fishing long and probably putting 3 or 4 pound in your net in the last hour. That's it really. I mean, there's a few perch. There isn't many bonus fish on factory. I mean, there was a chub caught in one of the hayjack leagues this year. There's an odd one of those kicking about, but they don't normally come out. Weight wise, to win factory bank, I reckon you're probably looking at 14, 15 pound to win factory bank. So I hope you found the information and today useful. If there's any more information that you need, whether it's tackle, advice, sections, where they're going to be, bait, just pop in and see us or call the number below, and hope to see you on the bank soon.